Hello everyone. Welcome to the lecture on globalization and advertising. This lecture is part of your paper on media and globalization. This lecture will help you in understanding the impact globalization has had on advertising, especially in the Indian context. Globalization has been defined variously by different scholars. But most scholars agree that globalization is characterized by integration of the financial sector, the accelerated growth of large transnational corporations, creation of global markets, and rapid changes in communication technology. Advertising. Very simply put, in any paid for non-personal communication from identified organization, body or individual designed to communicate information and to influence consumer behavior. Scholars have described advertising as a kind of public culture production centered on a distinctive form of community production, the production of commodity images. William Mazzarella goes on to define advertising as a knowledge-intensive business service. Given that advertising is a modern knowledge-based industry, it is innately tied to globalization. Globalization. Global trends in advertising tend to influence local trend. However, local cultures and identity leave their mark on global advertising trends too. The effect, sometimes termed globalization, where both local and global considerations are taken into account in business practices. We have dealt very briefly with the terms globalization, advertising, and globalization until now. They constitute the three components of this lecture. Let us now engage with these components in detail. Part 1. Globalization, the markets, and the economy. After the end of Cold War, the bipolar way of looking at the world economy changed to a more multipolar exploration. With greater transnational flow of funds as foreign direct investment across countries, more international trade and a multinational production process. For the first time, the concept of a closed economy was left behind. Globalization, media, and India. The media industry in India could not remain immune to the forces of globalization, which become a powerful force towards the end of the 20th century. Traditionally, the state had a big role as a public service broadcaster in developing nations, often with little or no competition. With the opening up of skies in India in the early 1990s, or what was termed the satellite invasion, the monopoly of the public service broadcaster was broken. The number of television channels broadcasting from India steadily went up over the years, and today, over 2.5 decades later, there are more than 800 television channels in India. Advertising gained as push as capitalist consumerism swept into India with foreign conglomerates moving into India media alongside the liberalization of the economy. However, globalization in the field of media brought with it fears of culture imperialism and culture homogenization. As disposable incomes rose, the markets opened up. There was a felt need to utilize Indian media to advertise about products. Television, with its vast pan-Indian reach, fit right into this plan. But open skies also meant that opportunity for information flow for the purposes of development, which could be vital for nations such as India. The mix of internet into this has further muddied the waters with no geographic boundaries applicable to them. Convergence of technologies has blurred the distinction between media, with television channels, newspaper and radio stations going online and strengthening the force of globalization. The many media vehicles available have also led to increasing audience of fragmentation and reduced attention spans. You would be surprised to know that according to some scholars, the average attention span of audience has now reduced to mere 8 seconds, which is less than that of a goldfish. From the first screen, television, to the second screen of the laptop and to the third screen of the mobile, technology has enabled us to receive all media onto our tiny screens. Of course, issue of access remain not only for the traditional but also for the digital media, with only a quarter of the world being able to go on to the internet. Recap of part 1. Let us now have a quick recap of what we have learned so far. We saw that forces of globalization working in the tandem with changing industry dynamics in India created the stage for a flourishing advertising and media industry. However, there are inherent contradictions and challenges in the site. In the second part of this lecture, our focus is on advertising. Part 2. Advertising in India. Advertising in India as an industry has its roots as far back in 1905 when B. Dattaram and Sons set up the first advertising agency. The 1920s saw a spurt of growth in advertising agencies with the L.A. Staunch and Company, Bomas Limited and J. Walter Thompson set up the shop. However, the introduction of the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, FARA, in the mid-60s led many foreign agencies to close their businesses. The exit of Coca-Cola in 1977 marked a turning point of sorts. But the 1980s also witnessed a reversal with companies that stayed back adopting as Indianized avatar. For example, J. Walter Thompson became Hindustan Thompson. Grey Worldwide teamed up with Trikaya to set up Trikaya Grey. The shifts in the attitude towards advertising agencies was in sync with the approaches of the government. As Nehruvian socialism till the 70s, Swadeshi in the 80s, mass consumerism and consumer is always right approach of the 90s in the aftermath of the economic liberalization. It was finally understood at the turn of millennium that the terms local and the global were not exclusive concepts but mutually constitutive attempts to make sense of the world. Globalization and advertising, theoretical underpinnings. Let us now try to understand the interplay between globalization and advertising by invoking diverse theorization provided by various scholars. Early thinkers like Marshall McLuhan believed that advertisings were the richest and the most faithful daily reflections of society. Although there has hardly been any doubt that advertisements both impact and reflect cultures. With globalization, the impact on local culture and also the integration of the local with the global has raised different questions such as those relating to the impact of global advertising on national and the local identities. Sociologist Roland Robertson, 1998, described globalization as a twofold process of the particularization of the universal and universalization of the particular. Arjun Appadurai, 1996, was of the opinion that the central problem in the today's global interaction is a tension between culture homogenization and the culture heterogenization. The new approach was to stress that the global is constructed locally and local is constructed globally. The theory of structuralism propounded that it was the position of an advertisement in the shifting structures of signification that rendered them meaningful. It looked at advertising as having no inherent meaning except as a signifier. The theory of exchange value, on the other hand, helped conceptualize how to make incommensurable commodities potentially equivalent. Sahlan came up with the realization that use values were necessarily socially and historically constructed. From the post-war paranoid discourse, which labeled advertising as a sinister centralized agency of mass manipulation, the theorists moved to advertising as having meaning only in the context of social and cultural constructs. Scholars like Williamson contended that advertisements were the most important culture factors molding and reflecting our lives. Starting from the initial years of looking at advertising as a vulgar, materialist, and deviously moralistic preoccupation, Williamson Decoding Advertisement 1978 helped in giving advertising more legitimacy. Recap of Part 2. In this part of the lecture, we trace the history of advertising in India from the early 20th century to the present day. In addition, we learned how scholars have thought about advertising, its purpose and impact. The point to be kept in mind is that advertising is seen as a system of signifiers that get their meaning from the social and cultural constructs surrounding them. Part 3. Global Trends in the Advertising Industry and the Indian Advertising Industry. Globalization had led to breaking geographical boundaries and has made the exchange of knowledge and information central to the conversation. Contrary to fears of culture imperialism, marketers are forced to look at the local connect for their advertising to work. Newer options in media vehicles also made the task of the marketer much tougher. In the 1980s, Theodore Levitt made the claim that a holistic global marketing strategy was the way of forward for all as the world was becoming a common marketplace. Saatchi & Saatchi, a global advertising agency, decided to treat the world as a single entity and sell its products the same way across the globe. However, Martin Sorrell, who was a part of the company, held the view that consumers are more interesting for their differences rather than their similarities. In less than a decade, the thinking had turned around to incorporating local culture sensibilities. From the approach termed Global Consumer Culture Positioning, GCCP, the move was towards Local Consumer Culture Positioning, LCCP. Advertising for consumers with ethnocentric attitudes could benefit from LCCP approach, whereas consumer with enhanced self-worth and status might go in for brands with global image employing GCCP. The concept of foreign consumers culture positioning, FCCP, was also helpful for advertising agency in the era of globalization. FCCP was primarily a strategy of positioning brands targeting at a specific foreign consumer culture. This strategy worked for brands whose personality and user group are associated with a particular foreign culture. This strategy worked for brands whose personality and user group are associated with a particular foreign culture. For example, French chocolate or Italian wine. The country of origin, COO, of a product was also found to have an impact on consumer buying behavior with product country images. For instance, products bearing the Made in Japan tag for electronic goods would give them more credibility. Example, use of language to indicate the culture the product is coming from, use of iconic buildings from a particular country, or placing of a flag or use of music associated with a country. Globalization. The term globalization came into vogue to reflect a radical change in perspective, heralding an approach that spoke of simultaneity of globalizing and localizing process and the interconnectedness of the global and the local. Globalization involves adaptation. including the design, text, packaging, etc., to render the product culturally sensitive to a market. Globalization and the Indian advertising industry. Global products flooded the Indian markets in the post-liberalization era. Some of them took the GCCP route and some the LCCP one. Multinationals such as Procter & Gamble, Hindustan Lever Limited and others quickly realized that the route to an Indian consumer is to have a global brand acquiring local flavor. Example from Indian advertising industry. Cultural values of Indian homes such as joint families were picked up by telecom companies like Airtel, which highlighted the ease of contact with modern telephony for the elderly with those away from home. Diwali or the Festival of Lights become a time to announce new products, new discounts, etc., as this was the time Indians spent the most. Festivals like Raksha Bandhan, when sisters tie a band on brothers' wrist as a mark of respect, started featuring an advertisements by multinational companies for the local connect. Colgate toothpaste came up with the memorable "Kya aapke toothpaste mein namak hai?" campaign after research showed the faith placed by consumers in India on the benefits of using salt to clean teeth. Cadbury came out with an entire series of adverts featuring Indian Bollywood stars Amitabh Bachchan with the tagline "Kuch meetha ho jaye." This again is a uniquely Indian tradition of sharing sweets at auspicious or celebratory occasions. The global fast food chain McDonald's worldwide campaign "I am loving it." It was launched in 2003 in 12 languages and 110 countries. In India, the company not only made the changes in the advertisements released in India in terms of changing the currency for local markets, the menu itself was overhauled to cater to vegetarian sensibilities in India. The menu reflected the local palate and stayed away from the items that are standard fare in other nations such as beef and pork, given the religious sentiments attached to them. Coca-Cola used Indian actors such as Amir Khan in different regional avatars like Jat, Pahadi, Bengali, etc. to portray the multiculturalism of India. Another trend was the launch of television shopping channels such as Home Shop 18, Star CJ Alive, now called Star CJ, which were unheard of in Indian before liberalization. Such channels were dedicated to selling consumer goods, with all programming geared towards only their products. These channels were criticized for taking advantage of people's insecurities regarding their bodies and for promoting superstitions through their products like Lal Kitab. But more companies like Naftol and Snapdeal have recently entered the competition. The trend seems to be here to stay. New media and digital advertisements. An analysis by KPMG shows the share of online advertising in 2015 at Rs 60 billion, with a compound annual growth rate CAGR over 2014 over 38%. Among the benefits of digital advertising are measurability, micro-targeting, and being geographical agnostic. Though television continues to be the major advertising revenue sink, the share of online media is growing rapidly enough to be able to perhaps overtake it in the next few years or decades. To encourage consumers to explore more about their products, advertisers resort to guerrilla tactics with prick banner adverts, floating or expanding adverts, which disguise the product themselves or unleash them on unsuspecting users when they request a site. However, For those who would like more information on the subject, the online world is veritable treasure trove of information, with companies going all out to give as much information about their product as they can, including features as well as customer reviews. Advertising such as that of Vicks Vaporub or Procter & Gamble product featuring a transgender who adopts an orphan girl found traction on a new media to the extent that its popularity was remarked upon by news channels such as CNN and NBC. The advertisement make a strong case of transgender rights and adoption of girl children, which was an area untouched by traditional advertising. The ad bears all the hallmarks of globalization, invoking the world's through eternal values and raising an issue of a concern in India for a multinational seeking to place its product. The case of Patanjali. The rise of Patanjali, an indigenous company aspiring to be a multinational, is a case study of marketing aspiring from the local to the global. The company promoted by Indian yoga guru Ramdev, Patanjali, rests its marketing on Swadeshi or nationally produced consumer goods. The advertising appeals used by Patanjali include the fear appeal, alerting citizens to stop the flow of Indian capital to China or other countries by buying goods produced within India. Akka Patanjali products. Also, the synthetic cosmetic goods might damage health or complexion, whereas herbal products as made by Patanjali would have no side effects. Interestingly, the company has utilized best practices from multinationals, using both online and offline worlds to market its products. Its CEO Ramdev has a following of 715K followers on Twitter personally, and the brand is among the top 3 most advertised brands in India. Recap of part 3. In the part 3 of lecture, we were introduced to various strategies prevalent in advertising to grab viewers' attention. We saw how companies tweaked their strategies to cater to Indian sensibilities through various examples. We understood the term globalization with the help of examples from the Indian market. Conclusion. In this lecture, we learned how globalization has brought about a change in the way the global economy functions. Advertising, being a part of a knowledge industry, has also been changed by globalization. The forces of globalization and localization have resulted in simultaneity of both forces, leading to globalization. With the advent of globalization in India, the advertising industry has also undergone a sea change. Multinational advertising agencies have subsumed or partnered with Indian agency to get a perspective on the country. Advertising is seen as a system of signifiers that get their meaning from the social and cultural constructs surrounding them. Strategies evolved to harness the culture symbolism, which can aid in marketing products, include global consumer culture positioning, GCCP, and local consumer culture positioning, LCCP. The concept of FCCP, or foreign consumer culture positioning, was also found useful in targeting particular foreign cultures. We gave example of how multinationals have used relevant culture symbols to get the interest of consumers, including of festivals, use of popular Bollywood stars for celebrity endorsements, highlighting Indian beliefs and practice in product creation are some of the way in which this has been done. A case study of Indian brand Patanjali using global best practices to promote itself as harnessing traditional Indian wisdom with the backing of its CEO, the charismatic yoga guru Ramdev, illustrates how globalization can challenge local companies to aspire global status. Thank you.